Okay, we have everybody's back there. All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the City of North Miami Beach's workshop on the new zoning proposals. And it's Madam Clerk, will you please take the roll for the record?
Councilman DeFilippo. Present. Councilwoman Martell.
Present.
Vice Mayor Kramer. Here. Councilman Pierre. Councilwoman Smith.
Present.
Councilwoman Spiegel.
I'm here.
Mayor Valle.
I'm here. Thank you very much. Okay, we have our presentation about the zoning, the new zoning code proposals. Madam City Manager, I'll turn it over to you and your staff and experts.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. We are all very excited. We've taken the next step in the very crucial process of zoning and comp plan. And today is our next workshop in regards to the zoning process. To my right is Assistant City Manager Richard Lorber, and to his right is Carlos Rivero, our city planner. And we have Natasha Alonso, part of the RMA team. And at this moment, I'm going to turn it over to Natasha to get us started.
Okay, super. Good evening, Mayor, members of the board. Thank you for allowing us this opportunity to give you a general overview tonight of what the zoning amendments entail. The booklet that you got in front of you contains all of the proposed text amendments as well as map amendments to each one of the mixed-use districts. Tonight's presentation, what I was hoping to do was to give you a general overview of how to use it, how to look at it, and how to interpret it for the regulations that are being proposed. I understand that you're going to need a little bit more time after this to kind of digest it and understand it with more detail, but I hope that tonight's presentation will give you a very clear picture of how to use the code and the new regulations that are being proposed. I'm going to talk about very briefly, again, that difference between the comprehensive plan versus the zoning. Again, the overview of the code structure and how to use it. What we've heard to date in terms of the issues and how we've addressed them through the zoning, map, and text amendments, the same way that we did it through the comp plan amendments. One other item that we've inserted into the presentation today that you don't have, and it's just one slide at the very end, is to address all of those issues that will be needed to that we will need to address at the end after the zoning is amended for each one of these districts. So I just wanted to highlight that before we end the presentation tonight, and then obviously the next steps for implementation and the project timeline. In terms of the public input process, I know I don't need to tell the council we've had extensive public input throughout this process, but for those that are listening that this is the first time they're hearing this, I do want to say that we started this back in March of last year, where we held a kickoff meeting both for the comp plan and the zoning amendments. Since then, we've had extensive stakeholder interviews, interviews with the council. We've had specific planning workshops that were held within each one of these zoning districts or neighborhoods, one in particular for the downtown, then the Intracoastal Mall area, and the Highland Village area. We then reconvened for another workshop with the council to go over all of the entire recommendations for both comp plan and zoning. That was in October. And then starting in January, we held another workshop that was specifically to address the changes to the comp plan. As you know, we went to Planning and Zoning Board in January to take forward to them the comp plan amendments, and then we had first reading just a couple of days ago, essentially, for the comp plan. Today, we are actually holding, again, the workshop just to address the specific zoning changes, both to your map as well as to your text for each one of these districts. So with that said, again, the order in which we're going to discuss or present to you the material is the same order in which we did it for the comp plan. We're going to break it down by the different sub-areas, by the different district areas, beginning with the town center, which is your Fulford City Center, then your employment centers. Then we'll discuss the waterfront districts, the three of them, the mixed-use corridor, which is the area to the south near Arch Creek and Highland Village. And lastly, we'll discuss the neighborhood center mixed-use district. In terms of the difference, again, between the comp plan and the zoning, one of the things that we've been talking all along is explaining that difference so that people understand why we talk about certain things in the comp plan and why we talk about other things within the zoning. Your comprehensive plan, the way it's written today, establishes very general land use categories. And with that are also established very general goals, objectives, and policies for each one of those categories. Your existing comprehensive plan, or your future land use map for that matter, establishes maximum densities for each one of those land use categories. This is how the comp plan is currently structured today. Your zoning, on the other hand, establishes very specific zoning districts that happen to fall underneath one of the land use categories that are currently designated in your land use plan. So to illustrate that, you might have a property that within your future land use plan is designated as commercial, but in that same general area, there are specific zoning districts such as B1, B2, B3 that are underneath that same general land use category but have specific zoning criteria. So your zoning establishes your maximum densities, your maximum heights, your specific lot standards such as setbacks, lot coverages, etc. All of the details that the comp plan does not entail. In terms of the proposed amendments, we are still proposing to have or contain within the comp plan and the zoning the same level of detail. For the comp plan, our main objectives, and if you recall in the presentations that Jean has given you, our main proposed changes to the comp plan entail refining some of the existing mixed-use categories, consolidating some of the land use categories that exist today into new mixed-use categories, and then refining the goals and objectives and policies based on the development scenarios and objectives that we've together collaboratively both through your strategic plan and in the various discussions that we've had with the board and the council and the community and stakeholders, what the specific objectives are for each one of those areas. So those have been refined. In terms of the proposed amendments to the comp plan, the biggest change that we've brought forward to you has been replacing the maximum density allocations for each one of these sites with a concept, with a basket of rights concept. And I'm going to explain that in a minute, what that is. I know that we've had several questions and confusion in the past few meetings, and what I've done is I've added 2 slides just to explain that concept that I think will bring some clarity. In terms of the zoning, we are still establishing your minimum development standards that entail lot coverage, setbacks, height, and all of the specific criteria that each development has to abide by. But in addition to that, because we are creating a form-based code, we are going away from a more text-oriented type of language to a more visual one. Again, to guide the development, to ensure that there are the necessary development standards that are needed to actually illustrate the kind of development that the city wants, and to be able to balance that need of the built environment with the open environment, and as well as the aesthetic quality that we want NMB to change. So in general, we're going from again, that general land use category of commercial in certain areas and converting that into a mixed-use district. And obviously we've created 7 new districts, so they're all unique in themselves. And then we're converting from specific zoning or individual zoning districts such as B1, B2, B3 into, again, another mixed-use district. So all of those will actually be collapsed onto one mixed-use district. In terms of the basket of rights concept, I know that the question came up last time as to how do we come to the existing current entitlements, and how do we come up with our maximum entitlements. These next 2 slides that I'm showing you were not in your package, and we developed them basically after the presentation, after the first reading, in order to address the comments that came out of that meeting. I hope it just adds a little bit of clarity for you as well as for those that are listening to address that question about how did we come up with the current entitlements.
Can we get copies of those for us? Because, right, since the
Yeah.
type on, well, the one, what we can't see, the type size is this big, so it's like,
I thought that we were gonna. If you'd like, I'll leave them to the end. If you have questions, I can bring
there you
them
go.
up.
That'd be a good
Want me
idea,
to
that you can
share?
get copies of it made.
Do you want to just run and get those copies? Yeah. Okay. All right.
And could I ask, and you've done this presentation, I'm sure, many times, but in going over the land use, I thought we were going to concentrate on the zoning. So instead
are.
of going over what we did and we said and we should, is that really the way to make us have a better understanding? Or let's go into the zoning and then you can always go back?
Well, you're just setting up a little bit of preamble, right? Let's let her
Right.
make the presentation. They've timed it out, so they know what they're doing. Let's go to that.
Well, that was
Okay.
the question I was asking, though.
Can I ask one question, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, sure.
With the comp plan,
the workshop was more or less us being lectured. Is there going to be a time when we are going to have a discussion and discuss ideas amongst ourselves?
There's no
Yes.
reason why we can't do it tonight.
Correct, and I've broken up the presentation into basically 3 parts. The second part, which I'm about to get into, has to do with how to use the code. And I think if you listen to that, then we can stop, break for questions, and then we can go into the specifics as to what are the issues that we addressed in each one of these districts and how the code addresses it. Because if we get the general picture first, we might be able to stop there.
Right.
Yeah, is that okay?
Let's carry on.
All right.
Thanks.
Okay, so the next part is the code structure and how to use the code. Again, I was explaining that difference between the comp plan and the zoning just to understand on a basic level what we're proposing to change. But in terms of the zoning we're proposing is actually going to be broken up into one overall general mixed-use district called the MU, where all the general development standards that will apply to each and every one of the mixed-use districts that we're creating in the 7 districts, all of the general standards will be allocated there. Underneath that, there will be the 7 separate zoning districts that will be established. So your town center, your employment centers, your neighborhood center, your corridor, and then your waterfront districts. All of those have unique, specific criteria that are only unique to that district. So in the general development standards, you will find all your definitions, the overall purpose of what is the intent of creating a mixed-use district, your general street standards, landscaping and open space standards, your use standards, general parking standards, fences and walls, design criteria. But then in your specific mixed-use districts, like your MUTC, EC, and so forth, you will have the specific purpose and intent for that district. All of the regulating plans that we're creating, again, to address the issues of height, compatibility, the street network, and the open spaces that are required will be addressed in each particular zoning district underneath that category, as well as specific parking requirements, permitted uses, lot standards, and so forth. So I'm going to start by giving you very briefly, showing you how you would utilize the code, and then you'll get an idea for how it's actually organized. If I were a piece of property, and I'm going to just show you where this piece of property is located. Let's say I own a piece of property on the east side of 19th Avenue, just north of 164th Street or Hanford Boulevard. And I wanted to know what the code allows me to do with the new development standards. The first thing I would do, or the first step, would be to identify which sub-area location my property is located in. And this is important because we have a sub-areas regulating plan. And every mixed-use district divides each mixed-use district into approximately 3 sub-areas, wherever it's applicable. Some mixed-use districts don't need it because there aren't any issues with adjacency and compatibility of existing single-family homes. So there's no need to break up the district. But other districts, such as the downtown or the employment center, we create these plans in order to be able to show in a graphic way exactly what that transition needs to be. So the areas with the most intensity permitted in terms of height as well as density are allocated in the core sub-area, and that's why we have an area called the core sub-area. The area with a medium in density, or the transition, is the area that is between the most intense and the least intense. And then obviously the edge sub-area is the area with the least intensity that is permitted, both for height as well as density. So that's the first step. The second step, again, here's my property, is to identify what the surrounding street designations are that have been designated for the property and the streets that are immediately surrounding the property. This particular property has street designations of primary A, primary B, secondary street, and alleyways. And I know that doesn't mean anything to you today, but in the regulations, there are specific criteria for each one of those streets. This plan shows the location of those existing as well as required new streets where, again, it's applicable. Not every district has that condition. But where it's needed in order to create that prescribed network of streets or that walkability, that pedestrian environment where we want to have more streets, smaller blocks to encourage that walkability environment. In addition to that, this plan establishes the hierarchy of the streets. Do you have a question?
Okay, at the risk of us going off the rails, but go ahead.
Well, when I was reading this, it primary A street is 19th Avenue and 164th Street, and you flip to the next page and it says primarily pedestrian-oriented streets.
Yes,
How-
I'll get to.
Is 19th Avenue ever going to be primarily pedestrian-oriented?
I'll get to that. I'll get to answer your question when I get to that next slide. Remember that what I am addressing today, right now, the first part of the code is very general in terms of understanding how to utilize the code and some of the general parameters. In every district, every classification of those streets is going to have a different meaning. So in the MUTC, the primary has one meaning, and it's still generally the same for all the districts, but it's going to be tailored specifically for that district. So you will see that when I show the other street designations.
Could you repeat what you just said? Because what I thought I heard you say is that in every one of these mixed-use districts, there are going to be different definitions
No.
for primary A, primary B.
So let me get to the next slide. In terms of the street hierarchy, in general, in your mixed-use guidelines, that general document.
One of the problems we've had over the years is a zoning code that no one can understand without hiring 3 zillion experts coming in and sitting with the city planner a half a dozen times. Are we simplifying?
If I can finish this next slide, I think it would answer your question. Okay. So as I explained, that general overall mixed-use district, which includes all of the general standards, including the general street standards, is in that one document that applies to all of the districts. Every mixed-use district, such as the town center, the employment center, the waterfront districts, have their own unique street network connectivity plan. And each street within each one of those plans have their own designations based on whatever that hierarchy is that is most important for that particular area. So let me step back generally for a minute. When we assign streets a primary street designation, it means that those streets are primarily pedestrian oriented. It means that if a street in that particular district has a need to improve their sidewalks, has a need to improve and create landscape strips in order to make it more pedestrian oriented, we've highlighted it, we've designated it that way because it needs to have an importance. So by creating it a primary A street, and you'll see in the next slide, we've actually developed certain specific design standards for that particular streetscape in that district to address that need of pedestrian connectivity or enhancement or embellishment, for lack of better words. Your secondary streets, on the other hand, promote connectivity and accessibility between the various modes of transportation. So here we're taking into account many things, not just pedestrians. We're taking into account vehicles as well as mass transit, rail, whatever multiple modes of transportations there are. So they take on a secondary level. But they're not, but they're sort of in the middle in terms of importance. Your tertiary streets and your alleyways also promote connectivity, as well as the ability to be able to assemble properties to establish block length requirements. One of the things that we're putting into our code today is the requirement that blocks do not exceed a certain length. And the reason for that is, again, to encourage walkability and connectivity between the multiple modes of transportation, whether it's by foot, or by car, or by bus, etc. So tertiary streets and alleyways are the kinds of streets within our regulating plans that promote the connectivity, but may be modified in terms of alignment, and they can also be deleted. And the reason for that is because we talked about allowing alleyways to actually be vacated for the purposes of assembling parcels and redeveloping larger block areas. This is where we've established those hierarchies. So each one of these zoning districts will have its own set of streets that have been given a certain hierarchy based on the need of that particular district. So today, right now I'm focusing on the town center, but to give you a little bit more information about that, we've actually established, and you'll see in your, within your packages, that for each district, we've done existing conditions, street sections of the existing conditions for each one of the streets that we've designated a hierarchy to, and then we've shown what the potential or possible redevelopment of those streets are to improve that public realm. Whether they are primary, secondary, or tertiary, we've addressed it because we think that the primary issue is to address pedestrian connectivity and improve the quality of life within the area. So you'll see this is an example of 164th Street, Hanford Boulevard, is the area between 16th Avenue and 20th Avenue, where we've addressed the specific requirements that the developer will have to put in order to improve the streetscapes. So we have, in addition to that, in addition to the new regulations that establish minimum design standards like minimum sidewalk width, minimum landscape width, we've actually added for the CRA areas, those areas, again, in the town center, in the neighborhood center, and your employment center, everything that's west of Biscayne Boulevard. For areas within the CRAs, we've created an additional tax rebate, increment rebate incentive to encourage these kinds of things to happen. And I'm going to discuss that in more detail as we get further in the presentation. In the other areas like the waterfront districts and the corridor, the streetscape improvements are actually required in exchange for the entitlements that we've given. This is consistent with everything that we've been discussing thus far in terms of the design analysis. Now, in terms of the street modification and deletion, we have very specific language here that gives both flexibility as well as predictability, both to the developer as well as to the city, in terms of making sure that the overall outcome of the development is positive. And the reason I say that is because we want to make sure that we are still getting the overall intent of every district, which is walkable, connecting, and pedestrian friendly, but at the same time we've got to give enough flexibility that development can come in and develop the way they want to design their own site. So in the regulations, in the general mixed-use regulations, we have criteria for how you would modify or delete or vacate any street that we've actually designated within that district. That gives both authority to the CRA, for example, if it's an area within the CRA, to make sure it supports the overall goals of the CRA. It gives the city planner the authority to be able to look at it and ensure that it makes sense in terms of connectivity. And obviously, for engineering and public works to ensure that the traffic and safety have been addressed. So there's plenty of flexibility and at the same time, enough criteria that keeps the intent alive for that particular district and the overall goals of improving your quality of life within the city. There are numerous criteria that they have to follow to do that. The next step, or your fourth step, again, here's my property, the third step, excuse me, is to identify what are the surrounding designated open spaces and greenways for that particular property in the district. If you recall, in the MUTC area, we talked about the possibility of certain blocks, that certain blocks could actually redevelop entirely, simply because of the condition of the existing buildings, because of the land ownership and aggregation is already there with single property owners. And we talked about the possibility of those sites contributing to the public open spaces, to the network of public open spaces within the city. So one of the things that we've done, especially in the CRA areas, is we've given, again, that additional incentive that if you do public open spaces, you get a tax increment rebate. But this particular site, again, when you're looking at it, you identify that there are two things that have been designated. One is an urban greenway, which is the area along 19th Avenue. Again, it's a street that's been called for to be designated and to be designed as an urban greenway. And the Canal Greenway, which is the area along South Glades Drive, along the Snake Creek Canal, as well as a new designated open space. And as I said, with the designated open space, it's optional in the CRA areas. But with the designated open spaces, there are new regulations that establish your minimum design standards for these open spaces so that, again, we ensure that it's not just a piece of property that's been dedicated or that's been called an open space but has no real meaning for a person to utilize. So we have specific development or design standards for each one of those. For the greenways, just like the streetscapes, we have street sections that illustrate the potential redevelopment of, for example, in this case, this is the Canal Greenway, the area along South Glades Drive, that shows the area between the private property and the public property. And all of that constitutes the urban greenway. So within the public side, the greenway, within the public side of the greenway is the area that's within the right-of-way along the street edge that contains the public sidewalk and landscape area. We show potential improvements for what we would like to see that area become. You'll see that there's a series of them. There's about 5 different sections that have been created for the entire Canal Greenway along Snake Creek Canal, both for the north and the south, and it addresses each of the specific right-of-way conditions that we have along the Canal Greenway on both sides. It also shows on the private side what the minimum required setbacks as well as frontage requirements that are within the private site that the developer would have to adhere to when the site gets redeveloped. And all of this together or collaboratively creates the overall greenway environment, which again improves the quality of life and the pedestrian accessibility within the city. The next step is to identify what's the maximum allowable height permitted for your site. This property that we've been discussing all along is permitted a maximum of 25 stories or 255 feet. Let me make 315 feet. Somebody corrected us. We had the wrong number when we were cutting and pasting. But in this particular location, that site is permitted to have 25 stories or 315 feet. You will notice that just like the sub-areas regulating plan, the heights have been divided to again create that transition of intensities, particularly where you have areas adjacent to single family or lower residential density, which is basically to the northwest. You will see that the area in red, which is the core sub-area, permits a maximum of 30 stories. The transitional sub-area, which is the orange area, actually permits two types of heights depending on where it's located, and it's between 25 and 20. And then the edge sub-area, depending again on where it's located, if you're on the far west side near the adjacent lower density residential, your maximum height is 3 stories, and as you come in along 19th Avenue, again, to be consistent with the rest of the intent of the downtown, you're permitted a maximum of 15 stories. So we've dealt with that transition through the heights plan. The next thing is to select the building type that you would like to build on your property. One of the things that we've done is in your general mixed-use regulations, the general document that applies to all of the mixed-use districts, we've created a series of building types. And again, because the code is form-based, we're very careful of the kind of massing and scale and look of the building. We're not dictating architectural styles, but we are dictating massing and scale to, again, encourage a more pleasing environment. And quality of life, because depending on the massing and scale, it will affect your view sheds, it will affect your light, and your balance between built and unbuilt environment. So we've actually provided a total of about 7 building types, going from the most intense to the least intense. So your tower building type, for example, is the most intense. It is the building type that is required for any development that's higher than 8 stories. And I'll get into the specifics in a minute. From there, you have obviously have the liner, the courtyard building, the flex building, townhomes, side yards, and courtyards, and they range from the most intense to the least intense. All of that detail is in your package. One of the things to note is that not all of the building types are permitted in every sub-area, and the reason for that is, again, to ensure that we have that transitional element for the heights and for the intensities maintained throughout that district. You will see that in each one of those diagrams that we create, for each one of these building types, we specifically state in both a plan view, a section, and a 3D, your minimum development requirements, that's your setbacks, your lot widths, your lot areas, your lot coverages. We're really making it very visually clear for both the developer and the property owner in the city, the intent of the overall development. We don't want ambiguity, and that's why we're going the extra step to actually create more illustrations to make this code very easily, not interpreted, but read. The other thing that I can note here, for example, for the tower building type, we've been talking about how do we maintain that balance between the built and the unbuilt environment. For the tower building type, we have specific criteria for the pedestal of the building. The maximum height is 8 stories. Any element above that, higher than the 8 stories to the maximum permitted height, which could be up to 30 in certain districts, is restricted. Anything above the 8 stories cannot have a floor plate that's any greater than 20,000 square feet. So again, it regulates the mass of that tower. It also requires a minimum separation of 60 feet between towers, which means they couldn't just put them side by side and try to wall the entire development and essentially create the same kind of massing. All of this is in there really for the purpose of, again, reinforcing the quality of life and predictability.
Can I just ask you one quick question?
Yes.
The slide that was like 2 back, the one before this, since that says figure 7, the little diagrams on the right, that's a tower. In other words, that's a tower.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
Yes, that is a tower. Then the next thing is to basically review what the permitted uses are for your property. So now that you know which sub-area location, what's your maximum height, what kind of streets or open spaces you're required to improve or develop or provide, then you just look at your permitted uses table. We didn't include this because all we did was take the existing uses, categorize them by category so it's easier to, again, to review. We're going to provide that in the next round in your next package to review. But essentially what we did is we cleaned it up so that it is easier to find use when it's actually grouped into a specific category. Obviously, we've broken it up by the sub-area, so just like the building types, the uses are regulated by in which sub-area they're in. Most intense uses are permitted in the most intense sub-area and so forth. This is basically the last step of how you use the code to interpret what development potential you have for your site is to then review all the additional standards that apply, such as parking, signage, landscaping, required assessments, the approval process or conditions. And then this one in particular has to do with the tax increment rebate incentives. We developed a menu of options specifically for the CRA areas. Again, your town center, your neighborhood center, and your employment center. And just to note, almost the entire town center zoning district is within the CRA area. There are portions outside, such as the Nova University site and portions of the west that are not within the CRA. But it applies to most of the area that is within the CRA. The entire neighborhood center is within your CRA, and your employment centers, almost the entire portion of the employment center is within your CRA. Only a portion of the east side of West Dixie is not. But this is important to note because those properties that develop within the CRAs, and there's a whole menu of options. If you decide that you want to contribute to the Public Infrastructure and Streetscape Improvement Fund, you could be given a maximum of 50% of tax increment rebate. The maximum that one particular property can get in terms of an increment rebate is 75%. With no matter what combination of incentives that they choose from this menu of options. But you can see that we've created a whole menu that vary in percentage depending on the kind of improvement they were giving. For LEED certification, we gave up to 50% depending on the level of LEED certification. For properties that contribute to the Public Open Space Fund is 25%. Those that contribute to public art, 25%, green roofs, 15%, and those that maintain public open spaces, a minimum of 4,800 square feet, and that build it, again, 10%. I will talk about each one of these in a little bit of detail. The public infrastructure and streetscape assessment that's been created for the town center specifically really applies to any new development, renovation, or remodeling of existing buildings within the TC district that is equal to or greater than 500,000 square feet. So that's the threshold. Somebody coming in to do a general renovation that's under that threshold is not required to apply these standards. Now, however, if they do, they will pay into that public infrastructure and streetscape assessment a per dwelling unit fee or per square foot fee, which is established by resolution by the city council and can be adjusted from time to time. We've written it that way in order to give you the flexibility to adjust it based on the market conditions and hopefully the growth that we're going to see within the city. The Public Infrastructure Fund for the MUTC district is being created by the city for the MUTC district alone. Again, it's specific to that area for the improvements of the public infrastructure and streets. And one of the things to note here is that we're kind of making it very flexible, that if a developer, let's say that particular property that we called out in here as an example, if there's already a project in place or a project that's in the capital improvements program for the city, let's say for 19th Avenue or West Dixie corridor, and it's better for the city to take the fee and allocate it towards that overall project, then the developer in the city has the ability to do that. Whereas perhaps for the other streets, it's better for the developer to actually build the improvements themselves because they're going to see the improvement happen quicker. And for the city, it's better because they're going to see the improvement happen quicker. So this allows for the flexibility of both options. Either you pay into the fund or you develop the streetscape improvements and still get the tax increment rebate. For the public open space assessment is the same criteria. Again, it's the purpose of creating this fund is to utilize it specifically for the Snake Creek Canal greenway improvements. Again, depending on where the city is, they would prefer perhaps to take the money and do it as one large continuous project. But it is specifically being used for that, as well as the existing public parks and public open spaces and recreational areas already within the mixed-use Town Center District. The public art assessment is similar. The only difference is that because we know that the city is interested in doing an overall public art fund for the entire city, we felt that for this particular fund, any monies that are collected could be utilized citywide and not just for that particular district. For renovations and existing buildings, the fee could be established by the city council. However, for new development, we have proposed within the new regulations to actually allocate a 1% total cost of construction. So that's something to evaluate. In terms, and really, the last couple of steps have to do with the approval process and what things have been specifically prescribed for that particular district in terms of conditions or approval process. For every mixed-use district, for each and every one of the 7 mixed-use districts, there is a pre-application meeting required, and that's actually spelled out in the general mixed-use district regulations that apply to all of them. And this is specifically spelled out for each one in order to address whatever specific issues. So just like the comp plan, where we've identified those specific issues for each one of those mixed-use districts, we've actually identified within the zoning the same for each one of the districts, and we spell it out. So for the MUTC, obviously the issues were the treatment of the Snake Root Canal, the alleys and the utility issues, public art, and then incentives for redevelopment within the CRA. The second component is the development approval conditions. So for all the other districts, meaning the waterfronts and the corridor, because they're not within CRAs, we have spelled out specifically at the end of each one of these districts, in terms of the text, the specific development approval conditions. So in the mixed-use waterfronts, you'll see when I show you the example coming forward later in the presentation, are those expected public benefits and services that we've been talking about, the open spaces, the greenways, the traffic mitigation, and they're all specific to each one of these districts. So we can stop here if you'd like. Yeah, good.
Okay, so we can. All right, so this is, so now we want to get into questions about the mixed-use TC district. Is that the deal?
Or
Before we jump to the next one, or?
The general overall structure, if you have any general questions.
Okay, we'll start with that. Got one here.
I really just want a little bit of clarification in regards to
It's that presentation. Let me just save it.
the tax incentives.
No, I have it. Thank you.
This tax incentive, it's a one-time or it's continuous? How does that work so that
That's
everyone
interesting.
understands?
We have not ironed out all those details. We've been talking about it internally with legal. This is something that the council needs to determine if they want to have it sunset at the end of the term of the CRA, or sooner, or it's up to the council to determine how they want to do that. We haven't specified it yet.
But it
Thank you.
follows the existing CRA tax increment rebate process, so it would be similar.
How many years do we have left in our CRA? Anybody know?
Did I see Rasha here?
14 years?
14
Might be
years.
through the duration of the CRA.
As long as
Hang on a
she's,
second, we're going to go, yeah. Go ahead.
well, I just want, the tax incentive, does that have to be written in stone? Let's say somebody has a project that doesn't fall underneath one of the open spaces or public parking or what have you, but they would need a little bit more incentive to build their project. So once we would vote on that, would that be written in stone or it has flexibility?
The way we have it written now, it's very specific. In other words, your current tax increment rebate, the way it's spelled out, it's almost for any development that comes in. We felt that because we're increasing the development potential and flexibility through the changes of the code, that we wanted to be very specific as to how you would get those rebates. So the way we have it written right now, it's very specific. You have to choose from one of those menu of options, or options within that menu.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Questions? Oh, go ahead.
Simple question, I think. For the street modification or deletion,
Yes.
are you completely eliminating any planning and zoning review?
No. This is in addition. So let me go back to that slide. This is in addition to your regular site plan review process, which has to go to the Development Review Committee or the Planning Board.
So it's an extra step.
It's an extra step
Okay.
Well, it's the same step. It's an extra review
level. Yeah.
criteria in the same process.
Ah, okay.
And if you see at the top of page 14, it's got to be recommended by the Director of Development Services, who reviews this with the different, agencies, sort of like TRAD.
By the way, who is the Director of Development Services? Is that the equivalent of our city planner?
No, I
That's
probably
the-
say I'm functioning like
it's
that.
an
right now.
assistant city manager position. Okay.
I wear many hats.
Well, no, I just didn't know that I didn't recall seeing that slot in our budget. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Save money. So anyway, this is the procedure for modifying or deleting those various secondary and tertiary streets. We had a discussion earlier today with one of the proposed developers where these schematic diagrams are not designing their project for them. It's just, this is the general street network we're looking for, but if they have different plans that incorporate the same level of connectivity and it's the difference between the way a city looks and the way a mall looks. We can make changes according to these criteria, and they're specific criteria, but it's flexible.
Okay. This is slide 13, slide 14, and a few others of these. 18, all bring in a global idea because of 164th Street. When RMA made its presentation, they've always talked about Mary Brickell Village. To me, and this is why I'd still like to have discussion with my fellow council members, that needs to be no more than a Merrick Park development, especially because when I look at slide 13 and you're proposing, you're even taking away the left-hand turn lanes on Hanford Boulevard. How do we let people build up to 30 stories at the east end of 164th Street and still get people?
Well, let me clarify that particular street section that you're looking at, it's just showing a typical cross section of the middle of the right-of-way. This is why engineering, and that's why we write it specifically, engineering needs to be involved. We're not proposing by this the elimination of a turn lane. In fact, you have to look at all the street sections that we've drawn for every one of the conditions of Hanford Boulevard. This is, the existing condition today has a median. So all we're doing is showing the embellishment on both the north and the south side of the roadway. In terms of the minimum sidewalk requirements, minimum landscaping requirements, but in terms of left turn lanes and where you connect and all of that, we are not prescribing that through these regulations. This is just the typical minimum standards for your public improvements, your sidewalk and your landscaping.
And I would add, at site plan review time, there would really be a requirement for a traffic study that addressed the circulation. At that point, we would really be looking carefully at turn lanes, directionals, in and out, ingress and egress. But that's not this. This is the general, where we're designating each of these blocks, the type of street, and then that you follow from that the different regulations that you have to apply.
Aren't you putting the cart before the horse? If we have a street that is built out now and you're proposing to keep that center and make it into a pretty center lane, how are you saying that we're going to permit up to 30 stories, or even in the transition area between 20 and 25 stories and dwelling units, and there's no way for these poor people to get out in the morning and get to their jobs because they're going to be in gridlock? Isn't that part of what we should be planning for? I mean, how do we not consider traffic and how we're going to move people in and out of there now before we change the zoning?
Wait a minute. Isn't that part of the review of everything that has?
Okay.
I've I got a question. The when you mentioned the thing about like turn lanes and stuff like that, is that up to us or is that a DOT thing?
Depending on who owns the road, if it's a city road, it's up to your engineering department to determine what that level of improvements are.
So we can. So we now would that apply to this road or is that would that be county?
To-
Who
to
would
every-
tell us what needs to happen there?
So I believe Hanford is a city road. Am I correct? Or yes, I believe Hanford is a city. But for example, West Dixie, there's portions that are owned by the county. So you will have to coordinate between the county and the city for the ultimate right-of-way improvements.
So it's county, not FDOT. At what point does FDOT get in there? Is that like
Only
Biscayne?
Only when it's a FDOT or state road.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay. All right.
I didn't mean to sound like I knew something that other people didn't know, but I think this is a good time. We've had this discussion where you clarify these traffic studies and how they fall into play with all of this. When they're needed, how, what our discussion was, I think, even for the audience.
To address the issue of the number of lanes and whether you need to expand the right-of-way from what it currently is today, that's something that's going to be decided at a site plan level when the site plans come in, and then you do the traffic analysis for each particular site. Now, the regulations that are in here.
Can I just one quick clarifying thing? When you say extend the right of way, you're talking about like widening a road.
Correct.
Okay. In plain English, that means widening a road, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Widening the road, because I think Councilwoman Spiegel said, what if we need to widen the road? Is this going to lock it in place? No, this is not going to lock it in place. Well, that's what I understood, because at the end of the day, if that is what's needed to accommodate the intensity that's coming in here, whether it's at 15 stories or 30 stories, you have currently entitled 9,000 units within your downtown, and we have not changed that. That's permissible today. So if there needs to be a road analysis of that particular corridor, and it deems necessary that the road needs to expand, the only thing that these regulations prescribe is that area between the edge of pavement and your property line where there's a minimum standard. So if the development comes in, that particular site comes in, they do a traffic study, they're bringing in 400 units. And based on the traffic study, there's a need to widen it. And there's everything, all the ducks are in place in terms of supporting that. That developer will have to dedicate whatever is necessary to expand that roadway. What these regulations are saying is that in addition to whatever engineering requires, the county requires, or city requires for the improvement of that roadway, you need to provide minimum sidewalk and landscaping improvements. And that's really what we're regulating with these diagrams.
All right. Let me see if I can just, because I know that there have been several people that have asked questions related to, traffic, and I guess a lot of people misunderstand. And you said something very, very important. You said that in this district right now, that there's X number of units that are allowed today, and that is not changing at all.
Not for this district,
Right.
correct.
So whatever is in place, whatever would have to be done today would have to be done after this would be passed just the same. The only difference is you're making them make the street even nicer when it's finished.
Correct.
With the pedestrian and I guess, is this the concept that they call complete streets, where they have
That's
the
correct, yes.
pedestrian, the bicycle, all that kind of stuff?
Yes.
Okay. All right. You had a question? Yeah.
Well, my only question is, hearing what you just said, if a developer comes in and wants to change, because between 19th Avenue and, what is that, 20-something Avenue, there's 4 blocks, let's say, and 1 block is going to be changed. And so therefore, in order for it to work, the street might have to have an adjustment. But wouldn't that have to be followed through on all the other blocks? I mean, you couldn't just adjust one street, because it's also aesthetically to look at.
Correct. To not have consistency.
So that first developer, that first person that comes in, may need the city's help, or what? How are we thinking along those lines? Because if he's going to change 1 block and that block needs to have the road changed, we have 3 other blocks that we have to address.
What she's saying is there going to be a domino effect, that adverse effect, if if we grant something to.
No, I think she's asking if we're going to holistically deal with the street. Isn't that what you're asking?
Look, the
Yeah.
the street was done, several years ago. The width of the street is there. You have these wide sidewalks already in place in certain blocks. So the type of work that might be required would be things like the turn lanes. It would not be going in and widening the whole block for the whole length of the block. What we don't want to create is now like a 4-lane speedway in there. It's still supposed to be a quaint, pedestrian-oriented street that people feel comfortable, walking on. The access to the buildings has to be ensured. The turn movements have to be ensured. But I wouldn't predict that we would say, because this gentleman wants to build on this block, that now we have to go in and redo the entire 164. That doesn't sound like what we would be pushing towards.
No,
There's also the side streets that have the potential to carry traffic from these developments through to the through roads.
I'm just saying the concept of it. I understand totally that what can be built, what we're proposing is what can be built right now. So when you say that, it's very understandable, except it wasn't built yet. Right. It hasn't been done. Now North Miami Beach is changing. The economy, thank goodness, is changing. And so therefore, the way it's been used thus far is on such a minuscule scale. Now what we're proposing, so I just want to clarify, and one of the things that you're saying with this study, traffic study, is that if there's, especially Hanford Boulevard, if a car breaks down on Hanford Boulevard, everybody's backed up. That's it. That's the way it goes until the car gets moved out of the way, a bus or a truck. So I'm just saying to you that if the adjustment may need to be in the future, that people are going to utilize what's currently in place. They're just going to make it nicer, more green space, etc., because we're going to go higher, which I think is something that is a necessity to have green space and have walkability. I'm just saying to you that at that point, it may no longer be a 2-lane highway. It's very possible, but it could be a highway where traffic would get done and people could have ingress and egress into their property without sitting in gridlock. But my concept, the question was, if that's the case and it becomes a necessity, how does a developer deal with doing it on his block and the other 3 blocks are sitting?
It's a good question, and the way you portrayed it, it's right on hit the nail right on the head. It is the CRA. Over time, if this project, I know it will be successful, but over time, as development comes and increases the resources of the CRA, that might be the kind of project the CRA partners with, and redoes the streetscape at a time in the future where it's clear that maybe there's more.
Because, and Mr. Mayor, just one more second. If a developer comes in and does this, and the developer makes the correction so that his ingress and egress is much smoother, he's not going to have the funds to make it feasible for him to do the rest. It's not going to be his responsibility.
Right.
At the same token, if his project feels stifled to drive in and out and have access to get to where they need to go on a timely manner, his project isn't going to be successful.
I've seen cases where the first development on the corridor has to pay for the full improvements, and then subsequent developments come in and instead of paying the city, they pay there's a trust fund set up, and their share goes back to the guy that put it out in the first place. So, we're so far away from that point of knowing, but there's a flexibility there.
Let me interject here real quick, because I know that there's some people that are starting, when they look at this stuff, they start from the presumption that somehow or another this, creates more traffic, or that it's not, except the roads are not right. and I don't think we can make that jump to that conclusion. I think that some of the people that look at that, they probably need to get and maybe get and look at some other places and because we're not reinventing the wheel here. Okay, if you go to downtown Coral Gables, there are numerous blocks and blocks and blocks that are spectacular, beautiful blocks, walkable, just like what you've described, that have 15-story buildings on them. And it's a 2-lane road. There's parallel parking, and there's 1 lane going one way, 1 lane going the other way. And so somehow or another this works, and yet, when people make that leap and just start from the assumption that, well, this is not, the streets are not going to handle it. Where are they making that assumption from? I don't think we should make that assumption. I think that this is part of development as it goes. You need traffic engineers. You need people to look at this as these things come.
No, I think it works, Mr. Mayor. In fact, when we were
If it needs to be addressed, if it needs to be addressed, it gets addressed.
When we were in
I guess.
Tallahassee, we saw how
Yeah.
it was 2 lanes and they were parking
Right.
on an angle,
Right.
and now they're doing mixed use and it works perfect. I just wanted to take it a step further. What was the professional's projection when it goes from one block to another, so that I
Right.
can understand?
No, I got
But
where you're coming from.
heard what Richard just said, and I thought that if you could get a builder to do that, he's kind of saying, listen, I'll be the bank, you pay me a little bit back more than I'm spending, but I'll take care of it. That's a possibility. It's a possibility. I mean,
All right.
If that's the only way to get the development done, they may do that.
Well, I just think we need to. You can't start with the conclusion without the facts. You've got to look at each individual situation and see what the facts are with the studies and everything else, and then you decide what's going to happen. Okay. If there's no other questions on this one, is that it for MUTC?
That's
Or
it for
what's
the-
next then?
The next is the slides that address the specific issues for each one of these districts and how we've addressed them through the new zoning regulations. So let me just jump to it, since I've got to flip to here. So again, just like the comp plan, we've heard specific issues for each one of these districts, and we wanted to show you how we've addressed them through the zoning. So I'm not going to go through every regulating plan or every regulation for each one of these districts. I'm just going to go to the specific ones that address those issues. I'm going to start with the mixed-use town center. Again, some of this you're going to hear is a repeat, but if you recall, based on the comp plan discussions, the things that we are addressing in the town center is really to encourage, again, transit, pedestrian-oriented environment and developments, and prohibit standalone auto-oriented uses such as surface parking lots, gas stations, auto service and repair. Some of these general policies and objectives have been carried through into the zoning as well. The issues that were raised again for the TC were the treatment of the Snake Creek Canal, the alleys, the utilities, public art, and the incentives for redevelopment in the CRA. Some of this is repeated, but I want to show you in the language where we've addressed it. At least for the TC is the only one you're going to hear twice. Basically, section 24-58T of the mixed-use district, this is where we require in the language specifically a pre-application meeting for each and every one of these zoning districts. For the TC in particular, to again address at that meeting prior to any site plan applications, the utility locations in alleyways, the treatment of the Snake Creek Canal, the placement of public art, and the eligibility for tax increment rebate. We've put this in here to remind staff, whoever it is that's here 5-10 years down the road, that was the focus of that particular district. In terms of the alleyways and utilities, if you recall from the general mixed-use standards as well as here within the MUTC, we have a specific language that talks about tertiary streets and alleyways having the ability to be vacated in order to, again, allow for parcel assemblage. So that's just to illustrate where in the code that is. Same thing with the Snake Creek Canal. By implementing the open space and urban greenway systems regulating plan, within the code, we've actually provided those illustrations that show specifically the kind of improvements we want along the canal and those greenways, those streets that have been designated as greenways. In terms of public art, we've created that table of that menu of options for tax increment rebate, one of them being the public art, and we talked about the assessments. We talked about that menu of option. So I'm going to jump right into the employment center, since this is the new district, and we're going to talk about specific issues within that district. If you recall, during the whole discussions, both through the design analysis as well as the comp plan amendment process, The main objective or goal of that particular district is, again, to encourage economic development that is supportive of high technology and service-based activities that, again, will bring an employment base to that particular area and for the city overall. In addition to that, we talked about limiting, as one of the goals, all types of auto-oriented uses. Not in terms of limiting them, we're still allowing them and they're acceptable, but they have to conform and be designed in a way that it's compatible with the pedestrian environment, and that it encourages pedestrian and transit use. We encourage vertically and horizontally integrated mixed uses, so this is not the kind of district where everything has to be vertically integrated. You're allowed to have standalone non-residential uses as well as standalone residential uses, and it's still considered to be a mixed-use district because, again, you have a mixture of higher, more intense types of uses within this district. In terms of the issues that were raised, this one in particular, we had the compatibility issue with the adjacent lower density residential, single-family residential to the west, and the potential historic designation of the TICO building. Those were the two issues that were raised during the whole process. In terms of how we've addressed them, again, through that pre-application meeting, is any development that comes into this site, we've specifically requested or require within the code that they have to address the issue of compatibility with the residential. We also talked about requiring some sort of clearance that the land is developable within the employment center district, especially if it's the area along the former TICO site. Did you want to ask?
Yeah, did we ever determine for sure if that TICO building is historic
or not?
designated?
Okay,
It is.
we didn't get it, so I apologize. We repeated it. We'll take it out.
All right, it's on you.
No, it is. But it needs to be, it needs to be addressed when people come in.
Right.
I don't think they'll be coming in very soon on that side, but they know they have a historic building.
Enough said.
Right.
Cool, thanks.
Okay. So in terms of the compatibility with the adjacent single-family area, and this is specifically addressing the former TICO site on the west side, just south of 159th Street. In section 24-58.2 of the Employment Center District, we've put in specific language that addresses the land use principles and addresses the requirement for that transitional area immediately adjacent to that single-family residential. You'll see that the language requires a 100-foot wide landscape buffer, as well as a transitional area that includes that 100-foot wide landscape buffer with a minimum requirement of 300 feet in depth. The actual heights that are permitted within that transitional area is actually prescribed in the Building Heights Regulating Plan. I'm going to show you that next. One of the other things that we've put in terms of the requirements is that within that first 150 feet of that transitional area, that any new development that's proposed there has to be residential in nature, so it's compatible with the existing single family to the west. So here is the Building Heights Regulating Plan for the entire Employment Center District. That includes both of them, the 163rd Street South, as well as the 159th Street. You can see for pretty much overall, we've allowed the 20-story allocation, particularly along the main commercial corridors. But you can see we've addressed the whole height compatibility issue for that site along the western portion that's adjacent to the single family. You can see that in the plan. We've actually shown the 100-foot landscape buffer. Again, this doesn't dictate the kind of design or layout of the site. It just shows that for the first 100 feet, there's some sort of landscape buffer that's required. Then for the first 300 feet, or between the 100 feet and the 300 feet, there's a maximum height of 4 stories. Then between the 300 feet and the 400 feet, there's a maximum of 8 stories permitted. And then beyond the 400 feet to up to 500 feet, there's 12 stories. And then beyond the 500 feet, it's basically where the 20 stories are permitted to begin. And again, that's really addressing the main issues of the community. Also, just wanted to reiterate that this particular site or area came in front of the planning board with a different scenario proposed for the transition of heights. The planning board has asked the property owner, the development, to actually come through our process in terms of this particular process that we're doing for amending the comp plan, both the comp plan and the zoning. And the height transitions that you see here are the ones that the planning board actually supported and asked us to move forward. In addition, the next district is the waterfront districts.
This is probably my silly question of the night. That 300-foot buffer, can it be behind the wall that the developer may want to build to enclose their property?
Correct. It is behind the wall or fence, whatever they build along the joining property line. So it is behind it. It's on the development side, on the new development side.
Okay, so the existing residential owners cannot then be heard to complain that they came in and where they had green space before, they now have a 6-foot wall.
No, the wall is going to be there. The
Right.
wall's going to be at the end.
No, the wall, the developer's property begins where this granite begins. And this brown wood are the homes that
Existing
are
homes,
already
okay.
there. The 300-foot buffer can be, the developer can put a wall right here where the granite and the wood meet, and then that 300-foot buffer can be behind the wall.
Correct. The transitional area, yes.
I just want to make sure the
Yes.
existing residential,
It's not
homeowners-
impacted.
but they have no right to say, now you put a wall up there, I don't get the benefit of the buffer, because it's just an ugly wall. It's not
Because it's a
pretty
chain link
landscaping.
fence
Well,
now.
and also but it's private property and it's the backs of homes. I don't know that they want to be exposed to that open space that the developer might provide on their side. It's a private backyard. So we want the wall. I think it's better for them.
You know, never mind. Go ahead. This
Okay.
will just, no. I
No.
just thought of something else,
Paraphrasing.
but I mean, this may open a giant.
Okay.
Make a lot
But
more.
we'll keep going forward and then we can open it later.
Yeah.
All right, the next district is the mixed-use waterfront districts. We've actually compiled all three into the next few slides, and we've broken it up by the specific issues. But in general, for all of the waterfront districts, the goals and objectives that were stated in the comp plan and that are reiterated in the zoning really talk about maximizing that economic and aesthetic resource that's created by its waterfront location, by its geographic conditions. It also talks about the requirement of the public access to and beautification of the waterfront, and allowing for additional multifamily housing, enabling residents to actually live within the waterfront districts, again, creating places where people can access the water. In terms of the issues that were raised in general for all three, again, that public access to the waterfront. For the South Waterfront District in particular, the issue that was raised there had to do with the screening of the existing FPL substation over on the east side of the district. In terms of the Eastern Waterfront District, there were several issues that were raised. The first one begins with the compatibility of, again, that adjacent lower density residential to the west, or Eastern Shores. The improvement and expansion of the existing neighborhood park for Eastern Shores. The additional access points to the East Waterfront District, including direct access onto 826. The retaining and enhancement of the Miami-Dade Rescue Station for the community itself, and the addition of a police substation for Eastern Shores. So I'm going to go into... ahead.
I object to the use of the word park to describe the existing neighborhood park in Eastern Shores. Can we call
Yes.
that postage stamp instead?
Okay.
Sorry.
It's a tot lot.
Sorry, I just had to.
You're right. It's jarring.
Okay.
Again, it's not access onto State Road 826, it's from and onto. It's so important that
Yes.
folks grasp the concept that the
We-
traffic going east needs.
We are, and you'll see as I explain in the Eastern Shores, we'll show you the exact verbatim language that's being put into the code regulations. This was just to give you an overall of all of them, but I will address it when I get there. In general, again, for all of the mixed-use waterfront districts, that pre-application meeting, I know I sound like a broken record, but we keep putting it in for each one of these districts to ensure that all of these issues have been clearly spelled out in each one of them. So again, for the north, public access to the waterfront. For the south, appropriate screening and residential views related to the electrical substation. And in the east, all of the specific issues. Specifically, the addition of multiple access points, including direct east and west access onto State Road 826, traffic mitigation such that the development does not overburden Northeast 35th Avenue, public access to the waterfront, the retention and enhancement of the existing Dade Rescue Station, addition of a police substation, and long-term maintenance. That's just on a general, right at the beginning of each one of these districts, these are spelled out. We're later going to show you how these are actually addressed specifically within each one of the districts. So starting with the northern mixed-use waterfront district, that's the area to the north, immediately north of the Marina Palms development. Under land use principles, we've added, in letter C, we've added specific criteria to require active use along all levels of the development fronting the waterfront, again, to encourage a more active and lively waterfront experience. Under section 24-58.6, we've established, again, the criteria for the designated open spaces and greenway systems regulating plan for that specific district. And just like in the example that I showed you of the MUTC, for all the waterfront districts, and this one in particular, we actually have specific street sections that show what they should look like, both from the public as well as the private side. And then in terms of the development approval conditions, this is where those areas that are not within the CRA, they actually have specific development approval conditions that are spelled out. For the North District, the public services are basically requiring the developer to develop and maintain in perpetuity a single or a series of neighborhood parks or plazas along the waterfront, as shown in general in the designated open space plan. And each one of those should be a minimum of 5,000 square feet or in combination of 15,000 square feet if the properties actually assemble and aggregate land in order to develop one holistic site. In addition to that, it's the requirement for the developer to provide and develop and maintain in perpetuity a publicly accessed waterfront promenade, as shown in the regulating plan and the street sections that follow. And with that, I'm going to go straight into the open spaces and urban greenway systems regulating plan for the North Mixed-Use Waterfront District. You can see here, very schematically, shows the allocation of that waterfront promenade, the general streetscape or section on the left that shows the active uses along the waterfront and the minimum sizes of the sidewalks that are required to establish this concept. For the Southern Mixed-Use Waterfront District, we applied the same concept with the land use principles, the requirement of the active use along all levels. In addition to that, for the Southern Mixed-Use Waterfront District, to address the issue of incompatibility with the electrical substation, we've added specific language that says new residential or mixed-use development that is adjacent to the existing electrical substation shall be designed in a manner that the adjacent electrical substation is entirely screened along the adjacent side and not visible from the residential portion of the building. This gives flexibility that if it's an entirely commercial or office structure, that is not necessarily that important, but if it is residential, it must be screened. Section 24-58.5, again, establishes that open space greenway systems regulating plan. Section 24-58.5, the development approval conditions for the Southern District, again, are specific. They relate very similar to the one for the North, with the requirement of the open spaces, a minimum of 5 or a combination of 15 if they develop entirely together. The requirement of the plazas along the waterfront and the publicly accessed space along the waterfront. And lastly, that's it, the addition of the open spaces. That's pretty much what's been required for that area. Yes?
Question, I'm just looking at this, the E about the screening of the adjacent electrical substation. And I'm just concerned, the way that's worded, does that seem like that could be problematic in the sense that if somebody builds, let's say, an 18-story building, how are they going to screen it from view from residential? I mean, there's like, because you're up, so, they're going to see it no matter what you do.
Yes, if they're building a 30-story tower, but the site is wide enough.
A 6-story tower will look down into it.
Correct. I mean, one of the ways is to position the residential tower to be maybe facing the north side, which is the water view, and you can turn the building so that only certain units or the less number of units are actually facing the substation. The other way is to move it directly over to the Biscayne portion of the site. And then put, for example, parking structures and those kinds of elements adjacent to the electrical substation.
Let me ask a different question then. Does this allow for flexibility for the, for the professionals? I think it's important that we not over-engineer the thing in the sense that, if somebody assembles all that property and they put it together and they come and they say, this is how we're doing it, because this is what people want and this is what works, is that going to trip up and be a hindrance? I don't think we should let anything be in there that's going to be a hindrance to reasonable, things being done. And remember, at the end of the day, it's the people that are going to buy are going to have the ultimate say in what's acceptable.
Correct. you want to add, or you want me to?
I don't see
Are we,
that.
I mean, are we
I don't
tying
see-
our hands too much there?
I don't see that. I know that anybody who wants to develop in that zone has talked about that FPL substation as the main obstacle, and if there's the ability to address that, they would probably want to do that. They probably need to do that.
Right.
But
I'm
no,
just
I
I'm just
see it
concerned that the
as-
way it's written, it sounds like if if your building was 12 stories next to it, that then you can't do it because they can see the electrical substation, right? Isn't that
Well,
is that one way to read it, or am I reading it wrong?
No, I think we can reword it a little bit.
Yeah, I was going to suggest that you take out entirely and say substantially screened.
Right, I think there needs to be some discretion for the design professionals and
Right.
our professionals to work together to make something that's
I think
sensible, because
entirely is too harsh. I think it.
Right.
it
Why
That's a
don't,
good point.
yeah.
why don't you make it that it shall be screened from view for those people, pedestrians and public access uses?
Yes.
Okay.
That's really
That's
the
right.
only place that we have a right. I mean, if a developer wants to go in and build 12 stories and 10 of those 12 stories are going to overlook the substation, well, then that developer's going to wind up paying the real property taxes to us until he finds suckers to buy it,
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's the way the language should read.
It should be,
Screened at from visibility along the right of way.
All right, so we settled that one.
Yes.
All right, thank you,
well, what do we-
Natasha. We got that one resolved.
Okay.
Next.
Alrighty. So
Yes.
we left off with the designated open space and urban greenway systems regulating plan. Just like in the North Waterfront District, we show schematically the approximate locations of where those open spaces can be located, as well as the public waterfront or publicly accessed waterfront promenade and the design criteria for that. Again, we illustrated to show that it's important to denote on the development for that site.
Sorry, but again,
Yes. Yeah.
this picture is kind of for illustration purposes, right? That's not
Yeah.
saying this is absolutely written in stone. This is where the grass is going to be, type of thing.
Correct.
It's going to be
Yes.
flexibility for the design professionals and the architects and the developers and everybody to come together with what works, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Got it.
And
no, to some extent, that's where it has to be, because aren't you mandating that there has to be public access to the waterfront?
Public
Yeah.
access, yes. Now, the design, whether it meanders exactly like that, whether that open space is where we're showing
Right, you
it,
see that
it's
thing
going
in
to
the middle.
depend.
There's like something in
Right,
the middle.
not in the middle, but some of that
Yeah.
has to be there.
plus that one on the north, the larger square on the north in the center, they've actually gone to these sites, and so that's owned by the South Florida
Oh, that's
Water
the
Management
dam
District. So that's
access
the
thing?
so in a way these are showing
Okay.
in many cases this should be the location of this, but I also want to point out for a representative of one of the property owners who's here. So say you're just going to come in and build the corner. What we tell you by this map is that you don't have that park, that open space. If you're just doing the corner, there's none of that is in your spot. So it also gives some certainty to that property owner, that we're really not looking for this thing right on the corner. This
Right.
is more a waterfront thing.
Mine is just kind of a general question every time there's one of these pictures, because
Correct.
I just want to make sure that we're not in the business of designing, that we're not handcuffing ourselves by saying you must do it in this way, because
Correct.
that's not realistic, again,
No, that's
or
not
reasonable.
The intent.
Right,
Not the
okay, got
intent.
it.
And the language is
I didn't
very-
understand it that way. I understood that when they come in with the project,
Yeah.
that's what we
I
do.
just wanted to be clear
Good.
for
Okay.
my comfort.
All right, so the next waterfront district, the Eastern Mixed-Use Waterfront District, again, we've, within the land use principles, established the requirement for containing active use along all levels of the development that front the waterfront. We've, like the other district, established the designated open spaces and urban greenways systems regulating plan with the specific criteria for that. And in addition to that, we've established a building heights regulating plan to address the issue that was brought up by council and by the community, to address the issue of transition in terms of height and scale. So I'm going to start with one at a time. The first plan that you see here is the Street Network Connectivity Regulating Plan. If you recall the issue that was raised about the multiple access points off of 826, both east and west, to and from. one of the things that we're doing with this regulating plan is illustrating the level of connectivity that is necessary. It doesn't mean that the streets have to be designed and built in that particular fashion or the block pattern is going to be this way, but it does certainly call to the attention that there needs to be a higher level of connectivity. And that connectivity is there in order to prevent any impact onto Northeast 35th Avenue, again, to not overburden it. So the requirement of the multiple access points to and from east and west of 826 is in the language and is in the regulating plan to illustrate the concept. In terms of the designated open spaces and urban greenways regulating plan, if you recall, we've talked about enhancing the existing tot lot area. This plan clearly shows that tot lot area and its relationship to the rest, or in context to the rest of the district. You can see the existing tot lot area is that area on the northwest portion of the site. The new gray areas are the additional open spaces that are possible within this new development. And in the regulations, we actually prescribe in the development approval conditions, which I will get to at the end, the requirement for that, a minimum size for that particular open space that's accessible for everyone within the Eastern Shores District. You can see here again the same level of design standards and criteria that is required for the waterfront promenades and all of the other urban greenways that are connecting the pedestrians within the district. Just one thing to note, we remember that we, in this particular area, we went from an existing tot lot area of 5,800 square feet to a potential of an additional 6.3 acres of open space that the developer has the ability to maneuver, to design and place wherever they feel is necessary as long as there's public access to it. But again, gives that insurance that there's that level of quality that we're expecting and predicting is going to happen within that development. In terms of the, go ahead.
Before you leave the green space thing, you know, I know that ever since this property went on the market and the attorney Jeff Burkow brought several potential bidders that wanted to ask my opinion on certain things. And I remember I came up with my personal 5 criteria of things that I thought, you know, the community wanted in order to make anything there realistic or feasible. And, you know, one of them was that, you know, the traffic had to be dealt with. The 2 was that it had to be maintained as a neighborhood town center mixed use. It could not be just residential or, you know, or just commercial. The 3 was that it had to be it had to be made into, you know, connected and interwoven with the community and upscaled. So it's not like it is now where it's this, you know, this like suburban mall kind of in the you know, just plopped in there where there's no real walkability or connectivity with the rest of the neighborhood. So that was that. And then the 4th one was that there had to be some land given to the city is some kind of a thing in the development for a park, because of the fact that what the entire community of 5,000 people there has right now is a postage stamp. And that to me is just unacceptable. And then the last one was that there would have to be some sort of mechanism where there's some sort of impact fees that would be collected into some sort of fund to help mitigate impact that, you know, was going in there. In this particular case, I know that one of the things that I kept talking about over and over again was, in my opinion, because of the fact that the rescue station was there, and because of the fact that the tot lot was there, and because of the fact that that northwest corner faces the guard gate and all this other stuff, it seemed to me like the logical place to do the park was in that corner. Now I note that it's been written into, you know, into this language on page 49, but I'm starting to have some doubts that maybe we shouldn't specify exactly where it needs to be, in the sense that, just like I said before, with, you know, I'm not the design expert. I just, as a neighbor and a guy that knows and has been there 6 million times, you know, that back corner seemed to be the least utilized of the property the way it was. But now that this thing is, you know, if there's a potential that this could change, I don't necessarily want to put it into, lock it in stone, because, you know, when they start doing things, who knows, maybe the developer wants to provide a nice public park, you know, on the water with a beautiful amphitheater or something. Who knows? I mean, I don't know what their thoughts are.
Right.
I don't think we should handcuff ourselves. I think we should, especially in this parcel, because unlike MUTC, or I guess TICO is similar because it's one owner, so it's a lot easier to work with. But like MUTC, or even what's the one, the Biscayne Boulevard, the Dean's, ABC,
Yes.
what do we call that one? Mixed use south?
South District waterfront, yeah.
There you have 5 different owners you got to work with. MUTC, you got, 27 different owners. It's impossible to sit down and come up with something. In this particular property, since it's one owner, it's a real simple discussion. If you leave this a little bit more open, but you say, hey, we want A, B, C, D, and E, and then let it be something that gets designed by the experts, we still have our bite at the apple to make sure that all the stuff that we want is in there. But let's not handcuff ourselves with saying, put this in this corner, put that in this corner, put the, that's the way I feel. I mean,
Well, the regulations, the way they're written today, do not tell them they have to put the park in that particular location.
well, but it says,
This is systematic.
I just saw that it said neighborhood park on the northwest corner. So that's
What page are you on?
49.
Okay.
That's why I started, because I saw that and I said, whoa, that doesn't, because a fire rescue station and a police department, police substation or whatever,
Yes.
let them design.
We
Who
did
knows?
put
Maybe
it at the end.
they
Forgive
build it
me.
into one building and it's really cool and,
Yes.
So.
You're right. We did put it in at the very end, but in all the other districts, we've been very, very flexible in terms of where they locate them. But we did for this one, particular one, we did it based on the previous discussions. But we
But
can.
Well, I know, and I mentioned it,
We can change.
only about
Yeah.
700 times
Yeah.
throughout the conversation. But now I'm thinking, my thinking of where that park should be. First of all, is just my opinion, but there's a difference between what's there today. If in other words, if that was not going to change at all, then it's pretty obvious where the park would be. It would be in that corner. But if this thing is going to get redesigned somewhere down the road, you might as well leave it maximum flexibility for whatever's the best benefit for everybody.
Let me add to the park component, because it's very important that we not just look at parks from a green space, but we look at open space, plazas, piazzas, and that a park may not be contiguous, it may be parks. So I
Right,
think
right, right.
leaving it to the architects and the design.
Right, because Meisner Park comes to mind. That they have that one thing over there. They've got another thing on this corner. They got that central courtyard promenade or whatever that thing is. That it works. And I don't want to presume to know what works best. I'd let the
Okay.
experts do it.
So I have some research we did after this was brought up. In the general section of the code, earlier, under open space standards, it says the designated open space regulating plan shows the approximate location of these spaces. So I don't think they ever intended for it to be the exact location.
Okay. All right. Just
But as
just asking.
as
We got
she
it.
said,
But in this
but as
district,
she
we'll
said,
remove that
in
one.
the
Right.
section on this,
It's sold.
it says the northeast corner.
Sold. Don't buy it back.
We got to change it.
Okay. Next question.
Yes.
I don't know who was first here. Okay, go.
But what I'd like, I understand what the mayor's saying, and I think he's right, but then I think what you need to do is mandate a buffer along 35th Avenue.
Yep.
Because that fronts the houses across, it fronts townhouses, there's that condo right there. And it's the entrance, the guard-gated entrance into the private homes that we don't want to impact. So I'm thinking maybe a buffer. My other question is, why in the mixed-use waterfront south, north, whatever,
The ABC liquors
no, the
place?
one where there's an FP&L station?
Yes, south.
The south.
south.
We went to great lengths to require that it be screened.
Yeah.
There's another substation in the mixed-use waterfront, is there not?
There's a smaller one.
We should use the same language.
It should
We
be the
can.
same requirement.
Yeah, same
right?
requirement.
Actually, we understand that there's talks about the possibility of moving that. So
Okay,
we don't wanna-
understand. Some of us have heard that those talks have occurred before also.
Right.
If we're going to craft a code, why aren't we being consistent, and why aren't we, I mean,
Sold.
Yep.
Sold. Don't buy it back. Thank you. Good
Okay.
point. Next.
Richard, is there really only one owner on that intercoastal mall?
Oh.
Or there are two?
There's
You're right.
two.
There's actually two. Forgot.
So those two owners, it's very important. Do we have to have something when the one owner that owns the majority of the property develops? What can we do to incorporate the other owner into that?
It's a good question.
Because that's part of the access, that's part of the waterfront, that's part of what we're putting into our code. And how are you going to get that person to do it?
And that applies to some of the other districts as well, like the multiple ownership of the south waterfront. But what we're not saying that you can't develop it individually. It'd certainly be preferable if the property owners got together so that they could coordinate their plans, or, it's better to develop the site as unified as possible. But if that doesn't happen,
But how
there
much
will still be the ability to develop
How
the parcel
much
separately.
weight what we're putting into the code, how much weight would go on the first developer's shoulders to accomplish what the code says is mandatory, and yet there's another big parcel that is waterfront that plays into the access to the water?
I think the majority of the site is, it's got to be like about 90, 10, 95%, 5%. So the big parcel owner,
I bet you it's 4/5 to 1/5
Let-
on waterfront.
20% of
But-
the
Of
waterfront.
waterfront.
Sure.
But why don't we direct that question to our city attorney? Because it's been 39, 40 years since I took real property law, but I don't think that we can go back and change the zoning on the existing owner. We can only change it prospectively, can't we?
Wow.
Right, you are vested by whatever zoning is in place right now as to both property owners. I have not really discussed this in great detail with the planning staff. We can get you an answer next go-round. It is kind of complicated. If the one smaller owner wants to build first, what conditions do we impose on that owner? Or alternatively, if the larger owner decides to build, then what happens with the smaller parcel? I don't have an answer for you today.
Let
We
me
can just explore that.
Let me ask you guys, and Natasha, I've got an idea. I know that because in all of our meetings, as we've walked through this for the past year of this entire code and, all the different areas, MUTC, South, Employment Center, all these different things. One of the things that I kept coming back to is that whole concept that, in my mind, I would prefer to see if, like, let's take, for example, that the block there by where Lorenzo's is, right?
Okay.
Instead of, one thing that looks one way and one thing looks another way and whatever. I'm not saying that they have to be consistent in look, but that there's a consistency in the connectivity. The way we've designed this whole code is to encourage that sort of thing.
Correct.
Well, in the example that we just brought up, and I'm glad you brought that up because I forgot, there is another owner there, which is like that back corner, which would kind of chop off the entire connectivity. Maybe the way we address it, which I know we talked about in Mixed Use South, was if you assemble a certain amount, a certain threshold, then you have, that there's like a sliding scale based on how much the amount that's assembled together, and because then that encourages common sense development. Because to use this property as an example, if you just apply the zoning across the board, then you're right. If the small parcel builds, one disjointed tower there with no connectivity, no consistency with the rest of it, it destroys the whole concept and the whole idea. And vice versa, if the big parcel builds, then you're going to have like this. You're going to have this nice thing with this like old building, chopping off and blocking the connectivity on the water, and none of it works. So the idea that I discussed with you on the Mixed Use South, because there were all those different owners and all those different parcels, that it would be much better for the city if all those guys got together versus each one of them building one building, on where, the empty parcel between ABC and Dean's, one building that looks a certain way and faces a certain way. And then, there's another one on this way that's not connected. And then there's, 5 or 6
There's
parcels?
5 parcels. Yeah.
No, 6, right?
At the South District?
In the South?
There's 5.
Okay, so, you got, basically you have 5 disjointed
owner.
projects
Mhm.
instead of one nice and well-done project. So maybe the way to do it is, Mr. Attorney, to say, hey, you have to assemble X number of acres, and then you get these rules. And that encourages assemblage and development the way we want it versus
And you get
people just
rules?
doing things, willy-nilly, and then we're nowhere. Is that a solution?
You mean
Yes.
incentives or rules?
No. The
The threshold by which they
just
have
like
to
our
comply with the
PUD, just like our
regulations.
PUD ordinance is now.
Yes.
You have to have 5 acres to be able to qualify for it.
I do want to clarify one thing in terms of the regulations, and it's something that we still haven't discussed or ironed out in terms of the nonconformities, like an existing building that's nonconforming, and they improve it after there's a certain threshold that they'll be required to comply with the new regulations. If they pass that threshold, then in terms of improvement value. The same thing will be applied here. We'll determine what that is for all of the mixed-use districts. But if that one particular single owner wanted to redevelop and they're completely demolishing their building and building new, they would be required to do the access to the waterfront,
Right.
their piece. Now,
Right, but what do they do about the connectivity in the roads?
That-
How do they
well,
do that?
You can build a development and say, I don't know what's going next door,
right.
but I'm going to leave
Yeah, but
50 feet.
but this
to the
but in this
Oh,
par-
and the
in this
green space?
particular example, it's not like mixed use south. Mixed use south, there's only one guy. Well, actually, mixed use south, all the properties have a cross use easement for the access.
And I'm sure
That-
this one does too. I don't know what it is. We haven't looked at it, but there has to be access through the one property to get to the property in
the
the
other.
corner.
Yeah.
I would say if the corner property came in separate, I think 90% chance they're going to get together. But if the guy comes in by himself, we're still going to apply these regulations. There's still going to be waterfront promenade along the property. There's still going to be street frontages. And we will plan it and help design it that it
I
will
underst-
fit.
I understand that.
when you come
How
with
do
the
you?
next
How
item.
you're talking about the tail wagging the dog? How does one? This is the question that Councilwoman Smith asked earlier. The one guy on the block wants to do something. If you're the one guy on the block on Hanford Boulevard, there's already an existing street. I mean, and you don't need an easement because it's our street.
Mhm.
How would that? I mean, yes, I hear you, but as a real practical matter, how would that actually happen?
That's why I think chances are the incentives will lead the property owners to get together on a joint property development. I want to say that, and I'm still talking about the South, that yes, each parcel could be developed separately according to these regulations. There would be streets and whatever. The incentive clearly is to join the properties because then you can get higher heights, you can get more parking.
But where is
more
that
people.
in the? How is that? That's the
Just-
that's
But
the
that-
question I'm asking.
Mr. Mayor,
By-
that was why I was asking about the flexibility of the incentives. So let's say that 4 people got together and the 5th one
Right.
didn't on those 5.
But we were talking CRA.
But I'm saying let's just make up a place.
Okay, let's use mixed use south because that's a good example because there's
Yeah.
5 owners. There's a
And
cross
so
use easement
4 of
and
them
all
get
that.
together and the 5th one's a holdout.
Right.
Or the 5th one doesn't want to do anything, but the project could be from this level to this level for the entire city's enjoyment for now and forevermore. Is it flexible in this for us to say to that 5th person, the incentive would be even greater if you'll join in? Is it
Right.
written
Where
in
is
stone?
that? Where is that? You just said that there's
It
an
is
incentive.
greater.
Where is it?
by being able to make larger footprints.
By
Okay.
increasing the height, by expanding the lot coverage, and
But-
by making a basket of rights of
I know, but
entitlements.
but I must be missing something.
Yeah,
Okay.
Mixed use south.
right.
If one guy wants to build today, he can build according to the guidelines that are there, right? And assuming he can get out of the cross use, the cross easement for the parking or the entrance and stuff, assuming they can work that out, which is a private matter between them, assuming they work that out, how does the city get what it wants? Because otherwise, you're going to have one guy, and he's going to say, okay, I'm going to make my promenade here, and he's going to say, I'm going to make a road like there is now that goes between Prime and Area 55, and he'll put the palm trees on the side and the sidewalk, and he'll say, I'm done. But now there's no more connectivity, and we just lost the chance to kind of, there was our one chance to make that happen. how is that addressed in here?
Well,
The scope, the whole scope could be changed, we lost that.
No, but wait a second,
Okay, go ahead.
folks. I'm going to go on the other side. This is still America. Anybody who goes out, plunks their money down, pays $5 for lot number 1, is entitled to build how they want to build.
Or not built.
If the owners of lots 2, 3, and 4 get together and say, you know what, if we form a partnership so that we now have 3 acres instead of 1 acre each, we can go higher, whatever, that's their right also. But I don't think we as a city can mandate that those individual owners have to get together.
That's not what I'm suggesting. What I'm suggesting is in our PUD right now, which was an issue for the Blue Palms thing in the back, right? Correct? The Blue Palms or whatever that thing was called that developed, they could not develop to a certain level because they had 4.8 acres or something like that, and they needed 5. So in our code today, we have some mechanism that says if you're less than 5 acres, you get, this, and if you get tap water, and if you have 5 acres or above, you get, per whatever, Pellegrino or something, you get more rights. So
here,
why couldn't we just do the same
And
thing?
I just wanted to say that I wasn't mandating it either. I just wanted to I want to see that's in there that there's an option.
So
There's an option, not to take away their rights
Of
as a
course.
property owner, of course not, but to give them the option
That
to
they can
take
upgrade,
those rights
right?
to upgrade.
And that encourages them by, offering an
I
upgrade.
think the benefit to the smaller property owner is that this owner will have an additional basket of rights, if I may say it that way, in terms of height, density, and other benefits that will induce him or encourage him to aggregate his parcel with the rest of the parcel.
Right.
Because he will have more rights. by
That's what I'm
doing
just
it.
asking.
If
Where is
you-
that?
if
Where
you
does it
know-
say that?
Well,
It's
it does.
embedded-
Just
Well,
point me
it's
the page.
embedded-
That's all.
It's embedded with the changes that we did by creating the basket of rights in the comp plan for each one of these districts, where, remember, we went from a specific density allocation per lot to now saying this is your basket. That's what he's
Okay.
referring to. So that's one
should
thing that
help.
we're addressing it at. The other thing that we're doing by opening up those other benefits when you talked about heights is in our building heights plan. We're allowing certain districts to go from 15 to 30, like in the MUTC, simply to accommodate the entitlements they currently have today. So it's already in there with all the changes that we're doing. That flexibility is built in there.
All right.
So
Let's go
We
ahead and
can
move on
refine
because
it. Okay.
I'm not sure I'm getting it there, so I don't
Okay.
want to hold this up. We'll
we'll-
talk about it
we'll-
later.
We'll bring more clarity to that.
Right.
So we left off, the next point to address in the Eastern Mixed-Use Waterfront District has to do with, again, that compatibility issue. Like we've addressed in the other districts, we've created a building heights regulating plan that shows the minimum transition areas that are required, again, to protect those single-family homes on the west portion of Northeast 35th Avenue. You can see that within the first 300 feet, the maximum height that it's permitted is 3 stories. Then beyond that, there's a threshold between 300 and 600 feet where, depending on where you're located, if you're closer to the north end by the water, you're permitted a higher height of a maximum of 6 stories. And then if you're closer to 163rd Street, you're actually permitted additional height, so a maximum of 8 stories. And then you can see how it clearly transitions, and there are specific distance or transitional area requirements in terms of distance to achieve that balance. So again, it's transitioning from 3 stories primarily on the west to an intermediate area of 6, then 8, then 12, 20, and 40, which is really permitted only within the first 300 feet directly from the eastern portion along the waterfront, along the waterway on the intercoastal. In addition to that, we've specifically spelled out what the development approval conditions are for the Eastern Waterfront District. In terms of the public services, there are a total of 5 additional approval conditions. One, obviously, being the requirement for the developer to relocate, rebuild, improve, enhance, or otherwise address, per the direction of the city and county, the existing fire rescue station, because obviously there's more than one entity involved or one agency. The requirement to provide or otherwise address, again, per city direction, the police substation on site. The requirement to develop and maintain in perpetuity a neighborhood park On the northwest corner, we will revise that to that it's anywhere within the site as deemed necessary. But again, the requirement to maintain and develop an open space that's publicly accessed, a minimum of 65,000 square feet. In addition to that, we have provided for the requirement to develop and maintain in perpetuity a publicly accessed waterfront promenade. So again, that will apply to any property owner within that site. And then lastly, the requirement to provide multiple access points, including direct east and west access onto State Road 826, to provide traffic mitigation such that the development does not overburden Northeast 35th Avenue.
Can I ask a question? I know that this is maybe getting silly, but the northern exit out of the existing center now, it's along the canal, they come out
By the rescue station?
by the rescue station.
Yeah.
Can we mandate somehow that that traffic cannot turn right and go through the guard gate? Because remember, that guard gate is part of a special taxing district maintained by the residents. Is that part of shall not burden 35th Avenue?
Correct. Well, in fact, the fact that we're showing that open space along the entire western edge actually alludes to the fact that we don't want any more openings onto Northeast 35th Avenue, but we can
But there
state
is
it.
an existing one
There
already.
is, there is. It's a curb cut. It's a driveway. It's not a street, but we can actually put it in there where we would limit the number of access points if we wanted to.
Wait a
I would
second.
Keep that for site plan review.
I
We'd be
think
all
you're
over that.
I think you're getting
But not
into
in the
way
zoning.
too much detail there, because if you can't make a right, I mean, what if, first of all, when that, if and when
That
that
might
ever
be
gets changed and redeveloped, that should be design flexibility of what actually is going to work.
That could
But
be
I think
park.
going right, what about the residents that live back there that want to leave
Well,
and go back there?
No,
Go back home.
I got that. But what I'd like to do somehow then is, if it's part of the traffic design, then the developer has to contribute to the cost of maintaining that entryway. Because
Which
us-
entryway,
if they're coming out and turning right out of that north exit,
right?
and then going to go in, they'll have to do a U-turn to get back out. It's just, I mean, that I would assume comes in the traffic study.
Yeah.
I'm just
Yeah, but
asking.
we don't even have plans. I think that's.
Yeah, I
site
think
plan.
that we're
Okay.
down in the
That
weeds
could
of something
be,
hypothetical.
That whole driveway could be closed. That could be the
Yeah.
park there.
Yeah.
And we are establishing the
It should
public-
be closed.
But so we'll, when we're looking at an actual set of plans, that's when staff would take those concerns and
And could I just
Work
ask
with
a
it.
question?
Sure, go ahead.
When you do a traffic study, is the professionals in the traffic study the ones to determine the word overburden?
no, they have to show the existing conditions and then the traffic that comes from the new development, and they have to show according to a standardized level of service. So they don't make up the definitions of what's acceptable and what's not. There are adopted levels of service. A,
That's what
B,
I was
C, D, and
asking.
E.
So
And we
overburden.
also submit their traffic study to another consultant to review it independently.
So the overburdened isn't in the eyes of
Okay,
the whole.
back up. The developer does the traffic study, submits it to the city then sends it to somebody to look at? Is that what you just said?
Yes.
I think that's what they do
Our
now.
own consultant.
Yeah.
That's what they do.
Now
Yeah.
I look at it too, but generally we have a consultant that reviews traffic studies.
Yeah, I remember I saw this.
I know,
we
and I've
looked
just
at one
never,
of
I've
these.
never heard a traffic consultant say, no, that's way too much traffic. And when
Our consultant, our third-party consultant,
Right.
said that 2 months ago about something. So yeah, it happens.
All right, we're good?
Good.
Are we now to MUC?
We're now to MUC. That's the Mixed Use Corridor District. This is the area east along Biscayne Boulevard near the Arch Creek and Highland Village residential area. Again, the goals and objectives that we identified for this particular area is to maximize its location on a primary transit and business corridor, encourage economic development, and support both local and regional activity, again, that encourage a variety of workforce and market rate housing in this particular area. Again, we're encouraging to limit auto-oriented uses. They're still acceptable, but allow them to develop in a manner that encourages, again, more pedestrian and transit use. And this is like the employment center. It allows for vertically and horizontally integrated mixed uses. In terms of the issues that were raised during the whole process was, again, to create awareness of the adjacent Biscayne Landing environmental cleanup, related offsite impacts, floodplain encroachment and possibility of increased flooding, and connectivity and crime prevention. Those were the issues that were raised. In terms of the zoning, very much like in the comp plan, we've addressed those issues again by ensuring that through that pre-application meeting, those issues are discussed up front with the applicant that comes in with a site development proposal. In addition to that, we've actually found other issues that we felt needed to be addressed within the mixed-use corridor district that weren't necessarily identified, but we addressed them through, obviously, by creating the regulations for the particular district. One had to do with street network and parcel assemblage. If you recall, in the urban design analysis that we did for that area, we talked about the difficulty of those parcels being triangular in shape and the blocks, how awkward and very awkward configurations of the block pattern in that particular area. And we talked about the possibility of allowing certain streets to actually be vacated for the assemblage of the properties. Very similar to the town center district. It's also a unique condition here in the corridor district. Other issues that we addressed, again, is the possibility of integrating more open space, because this is another one of those areas east of Biscayne Boulevard that lack open space within their district or neighborhoods, and compatibility with the adjacent Highland Village residential neighborhood to the south. So to address that, we've created, again, the Street Network Connectivity Regulating Plan. This shows those streets that we potentially could designate as tertiaries that could eventually become vacated for the purpose of assembling parcels, again, to give that level of flexibility for new development within that area. In addition to that, we've created, obviously, the Urban Greenways Open Space Regulating Plan, similar to the other districts, where we've identified a possible location for a publicly accessed open space, primarily for the portion on the north near the Target site where there's one single landowner with substantial amount of property. We've created the development standards, the design standards for the greenways, as well as the open space types. And in terms of the development approval conditions, this is where we spell out the requirement for open space. And for example, for those development sites that are greater than 150,000 square feet, that is, if a developer or property owner assemble property that's greater than this size, and that's usually, again, for the area, like for example, around the Target site, if they were to develop those art parcels, they would have to provide a publicly accessed open space that's a minimum of 15,000 square feet. And so this is intended for larger type of developments that come in, they either assemble or the development of the out parcels, for example, along the Target site. If they did that with that threshold, that would be required. In terms of the transitional area minimum requirements, this is no different from the employment center or from the Eastern Waterfront District. We have specific criteria to help protect the existing Highland Village neighborhood on the south in terms of height encroachments and to protect their compatibility. Even though they're considered a higher intensity residential district, they're not necessarily single family. We still put in some parameters there to protect that. We've required a 50-foot landscape buffer, a transitional area as well that's actually defined within the building heights regulating plan and the requirement of residential uses within the first 150 feet. So within the building heights regulating plan, you can see we've done the same thing as in the other districts. We've located transitional areas to, again, protect that residential district from incompatibility of uses and height. In terms, now we're going to get in, go ahead. Did you want to?
Just when we had been in Highland Village and spoken to the Highland Village residents, we talked with them, and it seemed to make a great deal of sense to change the zoning code to allow homes to go vertically like Key West style homes.
We're going to work on that.
But it's not in here?
It's
Separate.
It's a completely separate, different zoning district. It's not. It's actually MH1. I believe it's what it's currently designated today. At the end of the presentation, there's a list of to-do things that we're going to be addressing, or we need to address, and that is one of them, which is to it's a simple text amendment to the MH1 zoning classification that says within lots within a certain size, they could be greater than 2 floors, etc.
Okay, but in here it says townhouse A, no, townhouse B, or townhouse 1, townhouse 2 permit. What are those?
Those are the building typologies that are permitted within the actual mixed-use corridor district. So remember, the Highland Village area is not part of this area that we're changing the zoning for. We're not rezoning that entire area, so they still hold their current zoning district classification.
I think I just wanted a simpler question answered.
Like an
You're,
example?
you're permitting one type of townhouse, but not the other type. What
Oh.
are they?
Got it. The differences between the townhouse type A and type B is one allows for a detached garage and the other one does not. So, for example, the one that does not have an attached garage has the ability to do like a private common area or yard between the garage and the main building. Whereas the second type is a type that's more urban. It's utilized in smaller lot sizes where their depth is probably 70, 85 feet, and there's no real private open space within the lot except for the front yard, and so the garage is actually attached to the unit. So it gives the flexibility for both types, basically.
And then why no zero lot line houses?
The courtyard and the side yard houses are the zero lot line homes. They're the ones that are actually, basically, they have a 0-foot setback on one property on one side, and only a minimum setback on the other side. Those are the zero lot lines. We just call
And that's in there.
and that's in there.
Okay.
Those we call them the courtyard and the side yard homes. They're both classified as zero lot lines. They just have a building. They have a form-based designation or name to it to actually talk about the specific building type, whether they have the yard to the side or internally, and that's why you have the difference between a side yard or a courtyard. Moving ahead to the last district. Last but not least, the neighborhood center, which is the area immediately to the north of the Spanish monastery. It's a very small district. It really encompasses only 4 blocks in total. The main objectives and goals that were established throughout this process was, again, to encourage that mix of uses, a balanced mix of uses that are characterized by this compactness, pedestrian-friendly design, and obviously at a neighborhood scale because it is the neighborhood center. The other goal is that development patterns should reflect design principles such as walkable neighborhoods oriented around the 5-minute walk and public transit systems. While no specific issues were raised for this particular neighborhood center, and we talked about that in the comp plan, we did address certain things that we felt were necessary as part of our changes to the code. One is the improvements to West Dixie Highway Corridor. To the West Dixie Highway Corridor, we're currently in discussions with both the county as well as the CRA and the city for the ultimate improvements to that corridor. We've put in certain criteria here that we think is important, again, for that portion that's within the private realm or the public realm that requires the minimum sidewalks and landscape features. We've addressed the requirements for open space and greenways as well in this district. Even though it's very small, we think that there are possibilities for that to happen here, and the compatibility with the adjacent residential districts to the west. In terms of the open space, this diagram is very simple, but it illustrates, definitely designates the West Dixie corridor as an urban greenway. You can see the specific requirements that we allocate on the west in terms of the improvements to the minimum sidewalk spaces, landscape requirements, and even a median to actually connect with the rest of the corridor improvements to the north and the south. Again, all of this in particular has to be reviewed with the county and the city. But there is a designated open space on the north portion of the property that both the city and the private owner share. We think that there's an opportunity to create a very nice, sizable open space right at the corner that has the ability to function as a public plaza.
And did this go as far down as the Spanish monastery?
It doesn't include the Spanish monastery. The southern boundary is the Spanish monastery property line.
For the tennis center.
Or the tennis
Right,
center.
so you really can't
Correct,
do
I'm sorry.
anything on the
tennis
monastery
center.
line.
It includes the tennis center?
It does not include the tennis center.
I thought the tennis center is this right here. Or
No,
is this is the Mackin property basically at
that
the
is
bottom?
just the Mackin property, correct.
Well, I got my question was going to be, I thought that went all the way down to the Spanish monastery line, but the other question I had was on the north side, what was the reason why we couldn't just extend that up, all the way up to where the hotel parcel is, so that it would be one contiguous zone from the hotel parcel, or basically from the Reynolds Park boundary all the way down to the Spanish monastery boundary? Wouldn't we be better by doing that?
So
Better off doing that?
we started that way, and then we realized that they had already vested entitlements, and we didn't want the our regulations to make it more difficult. They already had the
Yeah,
height.
but the property next to it doesn't have it. We
The
could extend it,
property-
you know, there's like, what, three parcels on the south, between 172 and the hotel, there's, you know, there's, what, 3 different parcels there, I think? There's the funeral home, there's the CPA and the Quick Stop or something. It's like at least 3 parcels there, right?
Their site plan, I think, encompasses.
They are in there. The northernmost line.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Of the
Okay.
of the district
I-
is
My apologies. I stand corrected. I misread that. I thought that was 172. Got it. That's 173. So they are included,
Yes.
but, okay.
So
Should-
the
No,
hotel
they're
site
They're
starts.
not included.
Yeah, look,
Because-
look, it's
Because
173.
It's one, goes up to one.
The top one is
No, but it goes
173rd.
down to,
Well,
No,
the bottom side is, why wouldn't we just zone that all the way down through, you know, up to the Spanish monastery? Couldn't we just do that?
So
Minor change, right?
Do you want to talk about the open space land use as a
Yeah, first I want to clarify that the street that crosses the tracks is 172.
Right.
So the block to the north goes all the way up to the Hyatt, and that's where the the funeral home is.
Yeah, we got
so
that.
It is included.
So
in
everything's in there.
this area for 4 stories.
so the diagram where the triangle is should be up a little further.
I think that's how it works. It just doesn't show the cross of 172. It should probably show that.
Okay.
Now,
Well, the triangle goes to one.
Right, the 172, this is where the Berry
That's where the
Pizza,
triangle goes.
and then,
Where you
no,
cross the
I think it's
railroad.
accurate. Yeah, you're right. Yes.
Where
The
you-
railroad, the crossing is not there. They didn't
But
show
if
the
you do,
crossing.
if you put the crossing in with your imagination,
Mhm.
as soon as you cross to the left is our property that she's talking about for a park.
I know the answer
By
to
the
that.
railroad
The
track.
the area right at 172, it's actually FEC right of way.
Oh.
Where it widens and it becomes
Ah.
our right of way, it's a little south. Even though there is a green strip there, it's
Oh.
FEC. Yes. Even though it reads to the naked eye, the actual space that could be turned into a public space for us would be a little further down. From
correct?
Thank you.
that's like that triangle, the gray triangles, where that driveway up to the 2nd floor of that office building. So
I have to
All
be
right.
there in the morning. I know exactly where it is.
So,
Thank you.
so
and
back to the question about extending this further south. What's up with that?
the city-owned land directly to the south to this is zoned community facility.
Oh.
And
Right, you're
There's a
right. We're
different-
talking zoning, not comp plan.
well, both. It's just this would have to be done with there's a referendum, and
Okay.
we've talked about that. This does not extend there at this time.
Okay. All right.
Okay. All right. The next plan is
Let's one more
Oh.
question on
I
this one
just
before
want
we
to
move.
know where Lorenzo's is. How far north do you go in that section? In other words, does it include the nursing home?
the nursing home, I believe, is on the north side of the canal, right?
Yes.
Right.
That's
Yes.
not included.
That's I think that should be included.
Yeah, that is a great point, because
That and that
I've
little
always-
strip store.
yeah, I've always
Yeah.
thought that, you know, that you need to make sure you do something to encourage the connection,
Of the
like
two
some
districts.
kind of great walk. I mean, let's face it, we're going to have this walkway, greenway along the canal, and then, you know, it should bend. Perhaps it's a project that bridge would have to be widened, of course, because there's no pedestrian access now. But, you know, that makes the bend and goes north to connect the monastery and up to this. What is this one called? MUC.
MUNC.
MUNC.
Neighborhood. Mhm.
Neighborhood Center. So that, you know, somebody could leave from MUNC and have the contiguous walkway going down
Walkway, bicycle
all across the
path.
bridge,
Right,
and
right.
then back behind, you know, on the south side of the canal,
Okay.
all the way to Mishcon Park and all the way up to Miami Gardens Drive if they want, and back around. It really creates the ultimate in connectivity.
And
So I think we need to. I agree with Councilman Smith. I think we need to pick that piece up somehow.
3 agreements.
I just
Not
want to
the-
show you on the overall map that shows all of the districts
Yeah.
and how they're for that particular district, and even the MUTC, which are, if I can just jump ahead, I'll show you
Okay.
that map. I'm almost there actually. So we added it in at the end. It's just to show you globally where everything is. It's not in the presentation, but you can see these are all the districts that we're proposing to amend, right? in your overall, in context with the overall city map, you'll see that the MUTC. Okay, can you see the arrow that's moving? So if you see this entire area within the one is the actual MUTC. That connectivity that you're kind of envisioning is sort of limited because we haven't encompassed, for example, the RM23 property that is between West Dixie Highway and the eastern boundary of the MUTC, which I believe in this case is 18th Avenue on the north. So for example, you see this property this entire development. We didn't change that because a lot of that is existing condo residential.
Townhouse.
Right, and what's the name of those townhouses
Development.
there? Right.
So what I'm saying is there were certain pieces within, like here, for example, that existing residential condo development that's on the west side of West Dixie, opposite the Spanish monastery, that we knew was never going to change.
Well, never is a funny word.
Yeah, but why
Never-
not extend
But
it
that-
so that it connects
let
like
me-
the nursing home?
So
that
let me finish that. Yes, in terms of the greenways, so
Yeah.
the canal greenways that we've established for the north portion
yeah.
of the Snake Creek Canal, that is contemplated with our required improvements to the canal greenway, as well as the West Dixie corridor. So in the discussions that we've had with the CRA as well as the county, the goal is to expand, to connect the improvements that we're showing in the in the neighborhood center for the improvements to West Dixie Highway, which is the link to the TC. We're already in those discussions about improving it consistently for the West Dixie Highway corridor. For the Canal Greenway, we've established that cross section for both the north and the south side that shows the connected improvements. It will be then up to the city to make sure that it's actually implemented in a coordinated fashion. But the criteria is already designed and it's already in place for that. It just has to be coordinated.
But I think that first place is she's saying right now that the waterways, which the retirement home sits on the waterways, that's going to be a part of the But if we don't incorporate, because maybe that's a premium piece of property just recently sold, we don't know that the person that bought it is going to keep it. Maybe if we incorporate that in the zoning, right now, that would be consistent with what our goal is to make that look. I would like that to be included.
That's the thing. That's the same thing I'm seeing. That how do you if somebody tomorrow comes and says, "Oh, I want to do this," and we don't have it included with these regulations, and the guy says, "Well, I don't want to do all that nice, front street frontage because I'm not required to." Like, how do we?
Well,
doesn't that mess up our flow there?
If you recall, some of us may know this or remember this. The north parking lot for Watercrest has a perpetual agreement that it has to be shared with Aqua Vista. The gentleman that donated that land put an agreement that the parking lot, the north parking lot, the one in the corner of 167 and 22nd, that has to be shared in perpetuity with the Aqua Vista townhouses, and it goes with the sale of the property. So I don't know what happens if we allow that to be redeveloped. Then does that cut parking lot for Aqua Vista short? I'm not.
No, we're talking about the retirement home. That the one thing I'm really concerned about is the fact that people have always said North Miami Beach you have to jump through hoops to get these variances and to get a project, and the whole purpose of all these weeks and months was to eliminate that. I would like that property somehow to be incorporated so that if they sell it again, if a developer comes in, he already knows the guidelines and we haven't changed.
How about it? Go ahead. How about what does it hurt to do? What does it hurt? Go ahead.
I'm sorry, but for sake of clarity, can you click the refresh button and reiterate what you just said about the parking? I just would like to get a good grasp.
The Watercrest retirement home.
You said Aqua Vista, which were the townhouses.
Correct,
That's
but
what
the
I wanna
Watercrest retirement home has two parking lots, one on the south along the canal and a larger one along the north.
The one where the car went airborne and went into the building.
Correct.
It's guardrailed, okay.
That parking lot was a gift from a gentleman, and the agreement, a perpetual agreement on that gift is that parking lot is to be shared between the Aqua Vista townhouses and the retirement home. And I believe it is counted as parking for Aqua Vista townhouses. So if we were to include it, and somebody wanted to take advantage of the rezoning benefits that we're offering, they may not be able, because it is my understanding that agreement goes in perpetuity with the property. I'm not sure exactly how it works.
They would have to do what they're going to do on 19th Avenue. They would have to build a building that would be conducive to have parking on the 3rd and 4th floor, because they know now that they don't have that access to that parking ever again. But the thing is, I would like, if we could, to incorporate at least that one eyesore, and with giving that, which was a generous thing to do. But if you've ever visited that nursing home, and I have, you have the opportunity of either squeezing into a place or walking 2 blocks. The parking's horrific there. So I would just like to incorporate an opportunity, not that it's coming on the floor, but it could.
I would wait 1 second. I agree with Councilman Smith. I said, what does it hurt for us to just throw it in?
I agree.
Well,
I mean, you know what? Because
I'll tell you
if
why.
tomorrow somebody wants to do something and they build a nice, parking pedestal thing with the building on top or whatever, and they work it out with the people from Aqua Vista, we don't need to be in the middle of that. We just say, look, this is a potential. If it never happens, it never happens. But where's the harm in doing it?
I agree with you, Mayor, and I agree with Councilwoman Smith. I mean, this is smack dead in the middle of West Dixie Highway, in the middle of the eyesore that we're trying to fix, and the element of being able to add that walk path or that bike path or that connectivity that really locks in and brings everything together is a vision that should be implemented here. And I do agree that ALF facility should be in this.
That being said, if there's a technical or legal reason that you say, no, you can't do it, tell us. But if not, then, it's
Before you get to that, I want you guys to take it one step further. Include the Aqua Vista Townhomes site also, because you can't say never. I forget, there was some little town.
I agree, because we're looking at 20 years.
There was some little town where they went in and there were like 13 homes, and a developer paid whatever that developer had to pay to get all 13 homes so that developer could build what they wanted to build.
In this book right now,
If we could envision a future where Snake Creek Canal becomes a very hot commodity, and somebody's willing to come in and buy Aqua Vista and the nursing home and give us the green space, figure out a way to say, okay, you can do that and you can have this amount of density if you buy all of it. But we should be planning long range so that they don't have to come back 20 years from now and say to City Council, we want to do this.
Mr. Mayor?
at the risk of buying it back, let's go ahead and make that comment.
I just
Let's
want to
see.
know, as this sits in front of us, does it go on the east side up to Treetop?
On the east side up I'm sorry?
Of West Dixie Highway up to the Treetop condos?
I'm not sure.
Behind Lorenzo's, that
Yes.
one existing condo. Yeah,
No,
that's all.
So all that's included?
That's all in MUDC,
MUTC.
all the way to the tracks.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
Portsmouth property and all that.
this follows the boundaries of the CRA.
So how did we do it the whole way on the east side and not on the west side anyway? That doesn't make sense.
Because the neighborhood center was added at the end, was added later. And so the town center, the boundaries that you see today are very similar to the boundaries that are there now for the Fulford City Center. But I do want to mention one reason.
Yeah, go ahead.
Technical reason.
Tell us the technical reason.
Right. The technical reason that we can't really just throw it in now is because we'll have to go back to the comp plan and change the land use. And just keep in mind that this is just one thing that you're doing. It's not everything. You have a parks master plan. If you want to build a connectivity and a greenway plan into that, it can apply to all zoning districts. It doesn't have to just be our mixed use districts are the only places where you have connectivity and greenways. So don't it's easy to get stuck in this, like this is everything, but this is really just specific to these districts. And you ask why, what is the downside? The way these boundaries were drawn was based on what was realistic to be redeveloped, where they could benefit from a mixed-use zoning and land use. If you start putting this zoning and land use on things that aren't likely to redevelop, you're making them non-conforming, which is going to make them harder to improve themselves as they exist into the future as they are. What would happen if these townhomes and retirement centers sold? They could do their own employer or developer proposed comp plan amendment to include themselves in these districts if that's what they wanted to do.
All right.
So it's not shutting the door to them, but it's just trying to make it better for them now based on what they have.
Real quick, Mayor, let me add this because she hit the nail on the head, and I was writing down the Parks Master Plan before you said it. We're working with Atkins, so can we make sure that in a Parks Master Plan, you know, that language that concerns, you know, our mayor and council is addressed?
All right. And listen, okay, then let's agree to this. We're not going to let perfection get in the way of progress.
Right.
We've got 99.6% of everything we need. We have identified something, and now I see the technical problem, because if you have to go back and restart with comp plan, you're just delaying other stuff that is actually has a better likelihood of getting started. But just because we don't pick it up today, we could certainly, this is like, you know, any other thing, we can pick it up next year as, you know, or somewhere like, you know, we can always adjust. So I understand now. Okay.
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah.
There are other problems as well. If they're non-conforming, they will probably have a lot of difficulty getting insurance, and if they ever need financing, it's unlikely that they're going to get it if
Right.
they're
Right.
non-conforming.
We'll deal with this one another day. Thank you.
Okay, so the last two slides relate.
But you know our sentiment.
Yes.
So, you know, for future
Well, I think
reference.
we'll address it through the Parks Plan.
And I'm sure anyone listening to this that is in the development community may probably heard that as well.
Yes. Okay, so the last two points to talk about or discuss for the neighborhood center has to do with, again, that compatibility issue in the building heights regulating plan. We were very sensitive here with the adjacent lower density residential that's to the west by ensuring that the maximum height along that western portion is 4 stories, and then anything on the eastern portion could go up to the 15, which is actually what they have today. Obviously, this would allow for more flexibility in terms of their site utilization. And then after this, what I wanted to talk about were the items that we know we have to address after the zoning is in place, after we adopt the comp plan, after we adopt the zoning amendments. And those really relate to, again, the city council establishing a resolution for establishing the funds for both the public infrastructure and streetscape improvements, the public open space, as well as the public art funds. So establishing the funds through resolution, establishing the fees for each one of those. We do need to address the cost recovery issues, the vacation of right-of-ways, air rights easements. There's currently no language in place within the city that addresses that. So we have to develop the ordinance as well as the requirements for in the process for vacating right-of-ways and establishing air rights easements. Addressing the Highland Village Heights issue that we talked about through a text amendment, and then addressing the cafe ordinance if we want to encourage sidewalk cafes within each one of these mixed-use districts. So these are the things that are still pending that will have to be addressed afterwards. In terms of the next steps for the zoning amendments, obviously, we have to go to planning board. That's scheduled for February 9th in the next couple of weeks. Then city council first reading and second reading. Today, you can see for the zoning regulations, it's the workshop February 9th for the planning board, and we're scheduled for city council first reading for March 3rd, which means you clearly have a little bit over a month for us to address any other concerns that you have. We can meet on a one-on-one basis if necessary. We can hold any more discussions that are needed in order to address the specifics of the code, and we really technically have all the way up to second reading to address any final tweaks. I do want to mention that March 3rd is crucial because by that point, hopefully, we will have the comments back from the state for the comp plan transmittal. So with that, thank you for this long workshop. We appreciate your attention and to this. Thank you.
I have one more question.
Yes.
Just kidding.
I'm ready.
Got everybody nervous, right?
Ready.
Is there anything else? All right. I definitely will get with you guys because in the conversation, something came to my mind about the that buffer situation on Tico, but we're not going to burden everybody here with that. So if there's nothing else, guys, then thank you for participating in the workshop. Thank you to all the everyone who came out tonight and bearing with this, and we'll see you in the next meeting. Thank you very much, guys. This meeting's adjourned. Yes, it is online. Yes, this is online. Thank you.
It's consistent.
Except for the additional pages.
Yeah. Okay.